Good morning and welcome to the 13th meeting in 2013 of the Health and Sport Committee. And as usual at this point, can I remind those present to switch off mobile phones and Blackberries as they may interfere with the sound system. The first item on our agenda is a decision to take item 3 in private. Item 3 is a consideration of our work programme. Can I have the committee's agreement that that item is taken in private? Thank you for that. Item number 2 is, of course, our fourth and final evidence session on the Victims and Witnesses Scotland Bill. And can I welcome the Minister, Michael Matheson, and his officials this morning, Jean McClellan, Head of Adult Care and Support Division, Louise Carlin, Bill Team Leader, Adult Care and Support, Survivor Scotland, and Anne MacDonald, Professional Advisor, Survival Scotland Strategy Team, and Rosemary Lindsay, Principal Legal Officer, Food, Health and Community Care, Scottish Government. Welcome to you all. And can I move directly to questions? The first question by Bob Doris. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Convener, and good morning. I think I'd say at the start that the previous evidence sessions we've had in relation to this bill has provided us with a pretty good focus in where we need to kind of drill down from the Scottish Government for some more clarity. So if I could move to some of the details within the bill, and that would be the eligibility criteria from which to participate in the National Confidential Forum. There's been a great discussion about drawing the line at 18 and whether that's appropriate or not. And I know the Minister has written to the committee outlining some of the reasons why it would be drawn at 18. I have to say that wherever a line is drawn, there is a feeling that if it was 16, there'd be issues, 17, 18. There are issues if you fall the wrong side of that line. So could you perhaps put on the record, Minister, why you've chosen 18 as the cut-off qualifier for taking part in the National Confidential Forum, but also perhaps address whether you think there is the possibility in exceptional circumstances for the Confidential Forum to show discretion and perhaps, for whatever reason, allow, say, a 17-year-old to access the forum if there's particular unique circumstances. So why 18, and is there the possibility for discretion?
My apologies to Bob and to the Minister. I think the Minister may have been wishing to make an opening statement. So if you could deal with that and the comments in your opening statement, Minister, that would be...
I think we'll just go straight to the questions,
okay.
Convener, if that's okay.
Great. That's great. Just to give you that opportunity, just in case.
The issue around the age limit was something that was given very careful consideration. And Mr Doris is right in that where you draw the line, there will always be an issue about should it be higher or should it be lower. And part of the work we undertook in considering this matter was looking at experience in other jurisdictions. So, for example, in Ireland, and in the approach they've also taken in Northern Ireland in this issue as well, where they have set an age limit of 18, but who are ahead of us in terms of their experience with this, to see what their experience was with those who were of a younger age. And in both of their cases, there was no request for anyone under the age of 18 to participate in their inquiries and in their commission. A large part of that, I suspect, is because the policy framework and the safeguards which are in place have changed over a number of years now, and therefore there are alternative mechanisms in place now for those who may be of a younger age and who were in institutional care for their concerns and issues to be addressed. Again, the focus on the National Confidential Forum is on adult survivors of in institutional care, and again 18 was seen as being the appropriate age for setting that particular limit. The other experience that's happened in other jurisdictions is that they have gone for a specific time frame in which an individual had to be in care in order to give evidence or to participate within their different forums. We've chosen not to do that. It doesn't matter at which point they were in an institutional care setting, as long as they're 18 or over. So It's largely informed by experience in other jurisdictions, looking at the policy framework which changed a number of years ago and improving the way in which institutional care safeguards were implemented, and that those who are younger, that there are a range of other mechanisms that can be utilised for them in pursuing any issues that may arise from how their care has been managed. But it was an area which was given very careful consideration, is one which I'm conscious would always draw a difference of views on. But I think 18 is the appropriate limit. The other thing is that a big part of what we are doing with the National Confidential Forum is informed by the experience we had with the Time to Be Heard forum, which was established, and again our experience from that was that 18 appeared to be the right age limit to set.
Yeah, can I come back on
Certainly.
on that, Commissioner? Yeah, I had mentioned whether or not there would be scope for discretion, and I have to say that's without prejudice, whether there should be or not. I suppose what the key thing for myself would be if someone is 17 years old, approaches the National Confidential Forum, they won't simply be told, well, you don't fit into this criteria, and that's the end of the matter. If that 17-year-old has needs, would the National Confidential Forum, whether they deal with them direct themselves, or would they find another body, organisation, support group who could deal with those needs? It's about making sure that anyone who comes forward with an unmet need, if they're under 18, that can be dealt with. So if there's not likely to be anything around discretion, what assurances could you give that any unmet needs will be dealt with appropriately and sensitively?
Sure, I would expect anyone who approaches the National Confidential Forum, whether it be someone who's under 18 or over 18, but the forum isn't necessarily appropriate for the issues which they are raising, to be signposted and guided to what the most appropriate organisation or avenue for support would be for them. So I would expect the forum to have in place a mechanism that allows them to give individuals the right type of advice and support, to signpost them to the appropriate agency or organisation who could address the concerns, or to give them advice on what they should do in taking forward any concerns that they've got. So I don't want it to be a no and you get no further support. It would be a case of giving them the advice and guidance that they require as to who they should go to and who can provide that type of support.
Richard Simpson.
Yes, it's really supplementary on that. I mean, one of the concerns I have from my own experience of dealing with adults of survivors as a psychiatrist, and I did deal with them, many of whom were revealing their abuse for the first time, not necessarily institutional abuse, but nevertheless abuse, was that they required a lot of support and help at that particular juncture. Now, we know from the recent North Wales inquiry, the number of new cases that have just come forward in the 18 care homes in North Wales, number of new people who've now felt able for the first time to reveal. But it seems to me that unless we have a very, very clear pattern of initial advice to those who might come forward to the NCF, saying you may wish to consult before you come, and to give them some advice on the likely reactions they're going to have, and make sure there's adequate support, then we're going to end up with a situation that was given to us in evidence, which is that people did not find it entirely a good experience. They felt, okay, they've been able to reveal, and that is a very important step for the individual. But then, you know, what happens thereafter? So I think having a care plan, or having some sort of pathway which they can be confident that they will get access to, and access to in coordination with appearance at the NCF, will be vital. So will the government, first of all, produce a clear map of the services that are available at the present time? Will they also, in the light of the fact that the NCF is expected to hold 200 sessions a year, I think, that they will give a clear indication as to whether they think those resources are adequate, and the government's intentions to ensure a broadening of that support system where it is patchy, to ensure that appearance before the NCF is a a positive experience, not a negative one.
I think Dr Simpson raises a very important point around the type of support that is available to individuals who choose to participate in the NC. If it would be fair to say that the evaluation from the time to be heard at pilot was broadly a positive one for those who responded to the evaluation process, and the vast majority of people found it to be of benefit to them. Although I do recognise and acknowledge that some individuals did not find it as helpful as they had hoped. What we also learned from that particular experience was the type of wraparound support that was provided to individuals who participated in that. So support that was provided prior to, during and after proved for many of them to also be very effective. And I know some of the evidence you've received from different stakeholders has highlighted that that's exactly what we need to do with the National Confidential Forum, and that's what our intention is for that to be provided. We're engaged with a range of stakeholders who can provide that support before, during and after, to make sure that we have got adequate provision in place to support those who require that. And I've got no doubt Dr Simpson will be aware different individuals will dip in and out of that as to their own personal circumstances. So it has to be done in a bespoke way to reflect an individual's needs. So we're working with those stakeholders to make sure we have that. The other thing is that in doing that, we have to also be sensitive to the fact that if the National Confidential Forum happens to be sitting in Glasgow or Edinburgh and some of its participants come from other parts of Scotland, is that we need to make sure that stakeholders who can provide that support in different parts of the country are geared up to be able to provide that support as well. So some of that work we're taking forward just now is to make sure we're doing that. We're engaged with, I believe, over 80 different organisations in different parts of the country to make sure that we have that type of arrangement in place, because it's certainly, in my view, extremely important if we're to get the health and well-being benefits that can come from acknowledgement. We need to make sure that we have the right supports for people. That will also be on top of the type of support which will be available within the National Confidential Forum itself, not in terms of counselling, but in helping to support someone going through the practical process of the National Confidential Forum. And it's expected that once the National Confidential Forum has actually been formally established, that they will have the procedures in place and staff in place who can provide people with the type of support that's necessary while they're going through the acknowledgement process within the forum.
Thank you.
Before I open it out, can I get just precious slightly on the very important evidence that we've had from the age thing, you know, because it was the care inspector who were raising the question of age. It's the current Commissioner for Children who had said that while a line would be drawn, you know, we've got to be careful here. And the previous Children's Commissioner who said we've got to be careful that no young person slips through the net. The care inspector, and you know, I've no view in this, but they suggested that Scots law and rights of young people were in contradiction here. So I don't know what the Minister's view in that is.
No, I understand where the care inspector are coming from. I think in terms of, and again in Catherine Marshall's evidence, I believe, to the committee as well, she highlighted the need to be very careful about the way in which you deal with younger people who may, if they were to make use of the acknowledgement forum, and whether that model would work as well for them, given the alternative means which are already there for to help to support young people. If there is, I'm open to considering whether there is evidence that would suggest that the age limit should be changed, and if there is clear evidence that there is a view that a lower age limit, say for example of 16, would be more appropriate, then I'm prepared to consider that evidence. But I think it's extremely important before making that decision is that we weigh that up against whether the forum is the most appropriate type of setting for a person of the age of 16, depending what their circumstances are at that given time, and how that would fit with other types of services which are there to support our 16 and 17-year-olds at this present time. So I think I'm prepared to consider the issue, but I think we have to be very careful about the evidence base and also how that would fit with those other services which are there as well.
Yeah, I think that's helpful to the committee when we come to our consideration. But in the specific question of Scots law, is there a, you know, have you, the Minister, you know, if you have had that claim examined, is there a, I mean, I think Care Inspector believed that the minimum age was 16 to concur with Scots law and the rights of young people from that age. That was in the evidence. Has anyone or your officials had a look at that?
Perhaps I can speak on this.
Yes, that would be helpful.
I mean, it depends on the area of law in which you're dealing with. I mean, for some purposes, a child is a person under 16. In some legislation, you might distinguish between a child as a person under 16 and then a young person as between 16 and 18. But it's not generally the case that for all purposes that a child is always someone under 16. I think between 16 and 18, I think there's in certain legislation they would be defined as a young person, but I mean that's just for acquiring certain rights. So, for example, voting rights you acquire at 18, you can get married at 16. So it depends on the area of law that you're in.
Yeah, we're just looking for some assistance here. The Care Inspector come along and said that this was contradictory to Scots law. I mean, we just try to...
Yeah, I think...
Yes,
Jean,
yep.
I thought it would be helpful to talk to our childcare colleagues, because obviously our division largely covers work with adults and older people. And what they tell us is that there are a number of measures in place at the moment to support 16 and 17-year-olds, both in care and as care leavers. Within care, every child or young person will have an assessment, a plan, and an allocated worker and a named person. The named person will be someone the child is involved in choosing. There's a requirement to involve a young person in their own assessment and plan and in deciding who their named person should be. A plan has to be reviewed regularly and include the views of the young person. And at a review, a young person has the opportunity to speak to their named allocated worker, who is responsible for making sure that their voice is heard. Local authorities also have a duty to ensure that young people are prepared for the time that they will no longer be looked after, and must carry out an assessment for each young person leaving care up to the age of 18. They've also got, at the time of leaving care, the opportunity to complain to the relevant local authority, which would be under various duties to consider and respond to that complaint. A local authority might also fund a significant case review if there were multiple issues. They can also alert and complain to the Care Inspectorate, who could also investigate. They could complain to the SSSC if the matter was specifically about staff misconduct. So care leavers have, at the 16, 17-year-old stage within the existing system, many opportunities to have their voice heard. And that's part of what we're doing within historic abuse, is learning from the past to inform the present and the future.
Yes, no, we accepted that from the Minister. The question is, the Care Inspector have come along and said that this isn't compliant with Scots law. We can't answer that question this morning. It would be helpful if we got some clarity in that, so we can weigh, because I don't think the committee have got any preset views about whether there should be 16 or 18, but given the range of evidence that we've had and from the bodies that we've received that evidence to, we need to make a decision as a committee. And now when the Care Inspector and current Children's Commissioner and I think the Vice Convener, Bob Doris, try to take that on a wee bit further with exceptionality and others, and I accept that the Minister is still prepared to look at this, but I think it's an issue that we need to resolve. One of the other issues that you mentioned in terms of all of that, there is some work, or at least an ambition, that children in the care system would stay in that care system longer. And that was another issue that came up, because our ambition is, I've not got a view on this at all, the committee certainly haven't at this stage, that they would stay in the care system to maybe 18. And this, having access, you know, this is a natural progression that we should be moving from 16 to an older age to get access to the NCF. Now, we've not got any views on that, but I think we need to resolve. The government's position is against some of the evidence and the range of evidence that we've had from significant players in this process.
I mean, can I just clarify that, you know, it is compliant with Scots law. I mean, for the purposes of the bill, child is defined as meaning a person who's under the age of 18. So for the purposes of this piece of legislation and the purposes of eligibility, a child is a person under the age of 18. So that's within this particular area. In other areas, a child has a different meaning, and different rights are required at different ages. But for the purposes of this particular piece of legislation, that's how it works there.
The other thing, Convener, from the evidence that you have received, what I'm not aware of is the evidence that they've presented of the potential need for those who are under 18 to make use of the forum. So I understand people questioning whether it should be a lower age limit, but what I'm not aware of is evidence that there is a requirement for it to be below 18 because there are groups of young people who would like to make use of it. That was our experience with the Time to Be Heard pilot, and it's been the experience in other jurisdictions as well. So, for example, in the Time to Be Heard pilot, I think about 3/4 of them were actually over the age of 50, and a very small proportion of them were under the age of 30. So, again, from experience in other jurisdictions and also from our experience here, is that there hasn't been a demand. But I do understand the questions that these organisations are presenting. What I'm not aware of is the evidence base of the need for individuals under 18 to make use of the forum. And if there is an evidence base for a demand of young people who have experienced institutional care and feel that the forum is an avenue that they would find as being helpful in acknowledging some of that, then I'm very open to considering that. But I think it has to be driven by an evidence base.
Whether there's evidence on both sides of the arguments is maybe a strong word to use, the evidence. But I mean, I welcome your response that we need to address this together in terms of the evidence that we've had. And Drew Smith, you want to supplement strictly on this?
On this as well, Convener. But like you, Convener, I welcome what the Minister said about being prepared to listen to the arguments on this further, and I hear what he's saying around evidence, but in terms of this group of 16 and 17-year-olds, we would be talking about very small numbers of people, I would assume. I suppose my concern from the correspondence that the Minister sent to the committee was, in terms of looking at this purely on an age limit basis, that not everyone who may wish to make use of the forum will be leaving care at 16, 17 or 18. They may have left institutionalised care at a much earlier time. They may, at the age of 12, have left them into kinship care arrangement, for example. So have you considered the possibility of making a distinction in eligibility terms that is based around whether or not an individual is currently in institutionalised care rather than whether they are 16, 17 or 18? Because I mean, there seems to be a consensus that no one is arguing that we go below 16 in terms of eligibility. But if you had an eligibility there and then applied a criteria that said, provided you're no longer still in care because of the other avenues available to you, I wonder if the Minister could just comment on whether that had been considered and the reasons why it had been ruled out.
I think that would be I think that's a very valid point. I think if there was to be a change in the age limit, it would have to be considered in the context that a 16-year-old's situation could be markedly different from that of an 18-year-old, that they may still have some sort of care provision or some sort of a pathway plan in place. And the Acknowledgement Forum shouldn't be seen as supplementing the safeguards which are already in place that we've made reference to. It would have to be seen as being complementary to that. But I think that's the issue here, is that you have to consider very carefully how these would play out with one another. And the duty of care to someone who's under 18, of course, is much greater in terms of how then the forum would have to respond to that as well. So I think we have to consider these things very carefully. When you made reference to the fact it could potentially be a very small number, international experience would suggest in a number of occasions is that there aren't those under 18 because of the alternative mechanisms which are already there, that they feel the need to make use of this type of acknowledgement forum. But I do think the evidence base, though, for 18 and over is very strong because of the history in this area. But as I say, those organisations that have questioned it haven't been able to demonstrate that, in my view, that there is a group of under 18s who could make use of this if the age limit was changed. And if there is evidence of that, I'm very open to considering that and to see whether that's a matter that could be addressed. But I do think the point that Drew Smith has made is that you would have to consider some of the wider implications of that and how that could be taken forward if we were minded to move towards a lower age limit.
Helpful. Gil Patterson.
Thanks very much, Convener. Can I apologise to the panel and to the committee, because I've got a petition across in the other office room being considered later on, and I'll need to leave. So I want to get in with this one just now. It's with regards to confidentiality and referrals to the police. And I note that the bill itself gives discretion to the NCF in that regard by in suggesting the word that they use is may, and that maybe a more definitive response from evidence that we've heard. Some people think that that word should be must and no discretion given. And I wondered what the government's rationale was in regards to this point and why they would pass discretion to the NCF to look at these matters individually.
Okay. I think it would be fair to say, although they have discretion, it's not unlimited discretion that they have. They must report matters where they believe the evidence has been presented to them, and that there is and if it could prevent a further crime being commissioned, and in that case they must report that matter. The issue of discretion they have is when they receive evidence where they have to consider whether it is in the public interest for that information to be passed on. So it's not an unlimited type of discretion which they have, which I think is important. I think some of the evidence that has been received by the committee has suggested as though it is almost an unlimited type of discretion which they have. Part of that is to try and help to is the nature of the acknowledgement forum itself, in order for those participants in it to have some understanding that the evidence which they present to the forum is that the circumstances and the nature of that will be considered by the forum commissioners, so that they have a level of scope in determining whether they feel that that information has to be passed on to the police or not that it will automatically be passed on to the police. And some of the experience from other jurisdictions is because their acknowledgement forum has also been involved as part of an inquiry investigating matters. It's been part of several different elements together, whereas ours is an acknowledgement forum in itself. which is somewhat different from what's happened in some of the other jurisdictions, where acknowledgement has been part of a wider process where they've been investigating and inquiring into particular matters. So we believe that that balance is the right balance to allow participants to a level of assurance that those who are in the National Confidential Forum, that there will be a degree of consideration to the facts and information which they provide, and for them to come to a judgment where they think that it's in the public interest that it has to be reported. If they don't believe so, then there is no need for them to do so. But if they do think there is the possibility of further criminal activity being commissioned, then they're in a position where they are able to, they must then report that matter to the police.
Thanks for that, Minister. My experience tells me that people that work in that sector, whether it be perhaps, let's say, rape crisis, and I'm a board member of rape crisis, but other people that deal with vulnerable people or people that may have been abused, that for some people, the last thing that they would want in the first instance with historic abuse is that threat of it being brought to the public's attention would worry them, and they wouldn't walk through the door in the first place. Now, I hear what you say, and I understand that, and I'm pleased in the way that you're addressing this. But how would we ensure, knowing that some people, that they may only want to walk through the door and disclose and discuss matters, and that would help them enormously. Not for everybody, because this is a very difficult subject, because there are no two people the same. It's not like having a broken leg. It's not like that, and you fix a leg and that's it done. But my concern, if you like, is how do we ensure that those people who want to participate don't feel threatened in the first place? What kind of methods will we use to ensure before them? Maybe it's a small step and a discussion without any around these areas before they actually make the disclosure. I don't know if that's possible, but I'm sure that people will not participate if they think there's a threat attached to this to someone else.
I think that's why we've tried to set the legislation out in the way in which we have, is that I recognise that there are some who feel that if the information which they disclose will be automatically passed on to the police, that they may feel that they don't want to participate in the forum and they don't want to make use of the acknowledgement process. So that was one of the important things in considering the therapeutic value that can be gained from the forum, is how you achieve that balance in terms of the public safety aspect, again, and the public's interest issue, against the therapeutic value that can be gained for its participants. And that's why we have given a level of discretion to the forum, but not unlimited, so that if there is the risk that further harm or a crime could be commissioned, then they must report that. But when an individual is explaining their circumstances, it's only right that the forum members there are able to look at that in the context of what's been presented by the individual to them, to think about, to consider whether they think it's in the public's interest for any issues that they may raise to then be passed on to the police. So it's to try and give that level of assurance that it's not a case of things just being automatically reported to the police, that they will consider the overall circumstances. And part of the forum's role, and the head of the forum, once it's established role, will be is the type of information that's provided to those who are considering participating within it about what their responsibilities are in these areas. So if they provide them with information that indicates that a further crime could be committed, then they must report that information. But also, if there is a situation where if they feel it's in the public interest that has to be passed on, then that will be explained to them as well. So that's part of preparing for those who may be participating in it, so they have an understanding of that, but not something which will just automatically be reported on once they've given evidence to the actual forum itself.
And should it take that course of action, can we be assured that complete anonymity in the part of the survivor is guaranteed, that they wouldn't be invoked in any way, because that may cause more damage to that individual?
Well, confidentiality of the forum is absolutely crucial in itself, and I'm conscious that you've received some evidence around the reporting of the forum's work and how it will publish its reports and the details of the evidence as it's heard, that some people would like they would like their evidence, they would like to be named in that process, and others who clearly would not like to be named in that process. And people have got different views in this matter. My view is that it's an operational matter for the head of the confidential forum to look at where there's a mechanism which they could utilise for recording information, but also using a way that protects someone's anonymity, but allows them to identify how their evidence is actually detailed within the National Confidential Report. So, for example, I think in Ireland they used a system where they coded the evidence which you received, which gave anonymity to the individuals who gave them evidence, but allowed them to actually be able to trace how their evidence has influenced what the report actually was. Again, that's something for the National Confidential Forum to look at how it can implement that in going forward. But I think it's important that people have assurance that there is confidentiality throughout the process to feel that they can disclose information in a safe and secure way.
Thanks, Convener. Thank you.
Right, Gil. Aileen McLeod.
Thanks very much, Convener. I just wanted to ask some questions around the hosting of the National Confidential Forum by the Mental Welfare Commission for Scotland. And obviously from the evidence that the committee has taken, there seems to be a general satisfaction with this proposal, though, and certainly one of the committee's evidence sessions we heard from the Chief Executive of the Mental Welfare Commission, Dr Donald Lyons, who gave assurances around how they, as an organisation, plan to ensure the forum is independent from the Mental Welfare Commission, and also explained in some detail the governance arrangements that they foresee. However, other witnesses that gave evidence to the committee also did underline the need to ensure the forum's independence, and also they raised some concerns around ensuring that such arrangement doesn't discourage people from coming forward to talk about their experiences, which, as we know, is emotionally is extremely difficult, and if they want to make sure that they don't face any issues around, the stigma of having mental health issues. So it was really just to ask the Minister whether you think that there needs to be more work perhaps done at the outset of the work of the forum to ensure that any people who anybody who's coming to give evidence to the National Confidential Forum are assured both of the body's independence, and also in terms of any issues around the stigma of having mental health issues.
Sure. At the time when we were looking at creating a body, and I think it's important to recognise that we need to create this body in legislation in order to give protection to those individuals who make use of the forum, to give them legal protection against defamation or anything that could be raised as a result of the evidence which they provide to it. That's why we need to have legislation in place to make sure that happens. But when we were considering the public body that it could be hosted by, I was very conscious of the need to make sure that it was a body which didn't compromise the role of the National Confidential Forum, and it was a body which had, to some degree, a track record in pursuing issues around the quality of care and aspects of that nature. And in my view, the Mental Welfare Commission felt like the most natural public body to host this particular forum. But I was conscious of some of the stigma aspects that could present in itself, and some of the work we've been doing around, although the Mental Welfare Commission are the legal entity that will host this particular body, the National Confidential Forum will have its own persona. It will be there as its own. It will have that level of autonomy to allow it to be identified as a body in its own right, while at the same time getting the type of support and expertise that can be gained from and being hosted by the Mental Welfare Commission. So I very often characterise this as though the Mental Welfare Commission are there providing help and support in the backroom functions of it, in terms of recording, reporting, record keeping, finances, these types of things which they are able to give support. But at the same time is for the National Confidential Forum to have that level of autonomy which allows them to be able to undertake their work in a way that's most appropriate. So that for those who are participating in the forum, they will see themselves as participating in the National Confidential Forum, not just some subcommittee of the Mental Welfare Commission. It will have its own persona and its own public relations programme and informing people about its work who may want to participate in it, publishing its reports, etc. But some of the backroom function is being supported through the expertise that the Mental Welfare Commission can offer. And part of that is because that allows us to get it up and running quicker. Because if you were to create a completely new body without all of that expertise that the Mental Welfare Commission can help to support it with, you would be in a position where it would take much longer to get it established. That by being able to use and tap into that expertise and support that's there from the Mental Welfare Commission, we can get it up and running much quicker. But it will be very much have its own identity. And its level of autonomy, which allows it to undertake its role in a way that people will be no doubt that this is a National Confidential Forum which they're engaging in.
Thanks very much, Shane. I just have a small
Yeah, if you, yes, certainly.
We just also ask when the Mental Welfare Commission were giving evidence to the committee, they also mentioned that there was a memorandum of understanding that was clarifying the mechanics of the governance arrangements between the Forum and the Mental Welfare Commission were being worked out. So just to ask the Minister, when do you think that memorandum of understanding will be published and made available to the committee?
We're doing some work on that just now, sort of idea. I can't give you a definitive date as to when it will be published because some of these issues are taking. It will take a bit of time for us to work through. Also, some of it, I think it won't be finalised probably until we have the head of the National Confidential Forum in place as well, because they obviously have a role in considering some of these issues. So, but what I will do is I'm more than happy to give an undertaking to the committee that as soon as that work has been completed is to forward that information on to you, or when we have a date that I can confirm is when we're likely to have it completed by, to make you aware of that as well. But it's an area of work that's there's a fair bit of detail has to go into to make sure that the Mental Welfare Commission, who are the legal entity and are legally accountable, have the right type of safeguards in place in working both with government and with the National Confidential Forum, while at the same time protecting the autonomy of the National Confidential Forum and the role that that's actually got. So it's something we have to take our time in getting right, but there may be some aspects of it we won't be able to finalise until we have the head of the National Confidential Forum in place. But I'm more than happy to keep the committee up to date on that particular issue.
It's just maybe we're having a discussion about this in terms of the progress of the bill. We wouldn't be able to appoint anybody as head of that until after legislation is passed. Is that the case? Or?
We're going through the public appointments process,
right, so
which we're using for that. So I'm not too sure whether legally, we have to wait for the legislation to be completed.
It's just because I think this is, you mentioned earlier about operational matters and the governance, and I think some of the questions that have come up about whether there would be a victims representative on that panel, whether we've no reason to believe as a committee that the evidence that we heard from the Mental Welfare Commission is that they see themselves clearly as a host, and they see this being branded differently to tackle some of the stigma issues. But these are very practical and would I suppose, be covered by the governance. So it's important that we get as much as we possibly can out of our information, out of that to address some of these questions that are being asked by witnesses and stakeholders in the process, you know, so that we can reassure them that these issues are being taken on. You know, so I presume that you'll be able to deal with some of these issues.
We're already dealing with some of these issues with the Mental Welfare Commission, so that process has already started, and I've also met with the chair and the chief executive of the Mental Welfare Commission, just exploring some of these issues, and my officials are already engaged in that process. And as I say, I'm hesitant to say it will be finalised by that date because of some of the practicalities that go around it, and then find ourselves not being able to fulfil that particular date. But what I'm more than happy to do is to try and keep the committee as abreast of these issues as I can when we get to significant points in taking that forward. I should also say I'm very grateful to the way in which the Mental Welfare Commission have gone about taking this role on. Mm-hmm. They've demonstrated, from my perspective, a real willingness to take forward the National Confidential Forum, to make it as effective and to deliver what it's intended to. And I've given their track record, I've got every confidence that they will help to deliver that.
No, I'm sure the other members welcome that, and it would be helpful to have an understanding about what discussions and what issues are being discussed and progressed on site before we, you know, as we are doing our report. I think that would be very helpful to know that these issues are being addressed, they're currently being addressed, the meetings taking place. That would be of assistance to us. Nanette Millen.
Thank you, Convener. It's another issue regarding eligibility, and it's around the definition of institutional care. I think it's been fairly general consensus from witnesses that foster care should be included. We have also had some discussion around kinship care, and I think the feeling there seemed to be that whether a particular form of care was included would depend on whether there was a link between the care itself and it being assessed and delivered by the state. And I just wondered if the Minister could make some comments on that.
Well, I think it'd be fair to say, you mentioned foster care and kinship care. Of course, abuse also takes place within the family setting as well. You don't have to be in an alternative care setting for that to take place. And the Confidential Forum has been set up focused on institutional care. And we've got provisions within the bill to allow us to be able to list the types of institutions that may be. It'd be fair to say that actually originally a lot of the evidence was that it should focus on residential care, and we have chosen to take a slightly broader approach to that, which allows for institutional care, which would obviously include those who are in, for example, long-stay hospital settings. Which may not have been included had we restricted it purely to residential care. I think if we were to extend that yet further to foster care, kinship care, it would then be difficult to explain why it shouldn't then be possibly not into other care settings that are not institutional settings, but other care settings where abuse may have taken place. And in my view, I think the Acknowledgement Forum is an area which is very much focused on historic abuse that took place within institutional settings. And I think that to expand that definition, I think potentially could make it more difficult for it taking forward its work, and whether that's the most appropriate forum for that work to be taken forward as well. We're also, should we say, we've commissioned some research which has been taken forward to look at whether the type of acknowledgement model which has been used within the National Confidential Forum is something that could also be used for individuals who were in foster care, where they may have experienced some form of abuse. But it may be that the forum for that to take place would be different from a National Confidential Forum. But the role of acknowledgement in that type of model maybe something that could actually be useful. And the research that we've commissioned, which I understand has already started, would help to inform us of whether that's a model that could potentially be helpful to those who experienced abuse in other care settings other than institutional care settings.
I think the concern was to kind of define how the care was initiated, whether it was initiated by the state, provided by the state, as opposed to like kinship care just within a family where the state wasn't actually directly involved. I think that was where some of the concerns lay. And the other thing was that highlighted was that a number of people will experience different forms of care. They might be in foster care, they might be in institutional care, and perhaps that should be taken into consideration as well.
It's not a case of the forum has a bar on anything to do with foster care as such. We've set up the National Confidential Forum based upon our experience again with the Time to Be Heard pilot and what the experience from those who've made use of that were as well. So we're trying to make sure that anything we do in this area has an evidence base to it, and also we've got some experience of what's happened from the pilot. Because of the potential unintended consequences that could come from not working these things through in great detail. But I think the other part is that I would expect the forum to be pragmatic for someone who was in an institutional setting who then, during the course of their evidence, highlights something that also happened within a foster care setting that they were in for a period of time. I would expect the forum to deal with that in a pragmatic way and to consider that at the time rather than saying, no, we can't listen to that because it was in foster care. I think that's more of an operational issue, but I would expect them to deal with that in a pragmatic way, given that it's intended to be a therapeutic setting as well. That's the way you would deal with that, I would expect, in those sort of circumstances.
Okay, thanks. Okay.
Is there any other questions from committee members? There's a couple of areas, I think, that the confidentiality and that's been done. And in terms of the capacity and resource demand, I think were some of the issues that were raised, and the importance of supporting people who want to access the forum, what they should expect out of it. So there was there was a degree of support and discussion prior to, and the argument was made for posts for as long as it takes in this process to support people who may rediscover an element of trauma when they go through this process. And sometimes it's been described to us that that there's a weight lifted off their shoulders, but there's it all comes back, and there's a coping that needs to be addressed after it. And it's just about the demand itself in terms of the hearings, the people that are going to be coming through, what's in place for them, how are we going to ensure that support is there prior to and post the forum.
We've given quite a lot of thought to the likely demand on the NCF once it's established, and that's based upon our experience again with the Time to Be Heard pilot, which we ran with, which obviously involved quarriers. And from that, our experience was around 1% of potential previous quarriers residents made use of the Time to Be Heard forum. We've also drawn upon the experience that they've had in Ireland and in Northern Ireland, and again, their experiences around 1% of those who were in institutional care settings have made use of the different types of forums and inquiries that they've undertaken as well. So, based upon that, we're working on that level of demand that may come upon the actual forum itself, and we think the forum will be in a position where it will be able to manage with that particular demand over the years going forward. The challenge will be, of course, is making sure, going back to the point that I think Richard Simpson raised earlier on, is about the type of care and support that's provided before, during and after. And we have, through the Survivor Scotland strategy, for the last couple of years, we've put in over £6 million into into that and helping to support a range of different organisations that work with individuals who have been subject to different types of abuse to support them. And what we're doing is working with the various stakeholders to make sure that we've got sufficient capacity in place to help to support any potential increase in demand that could come about as a result of the National Confidential Forum operating. But again, the point I made earlier, I think it's particularly important that we do that in a being aware that people could come from anywhere in Scotland. So we have to look at how that's spread geographically as well. And the work that we're taking forward with stakeholders is to scope out some of that and to make sure that there is sufficient capacity. We believe there is, but in the discussions we're having with them, we'll make sure that is the case, because it's certainly my intention that the potential benefits of the National Confidential Forum should not be undermined in any way by a lack of support, either before, during or after that particular process. But there are, we've already engaged with, I think, over 80 different organisations from different parts of the country in this area, and that's what we'll continue to take forward. The other important part is that once the National Confidential Forum has been created in itself, is to make sure that they have the right processes in place to, when someone indicates that they're interested, and how they can then advise them as to where they can get support and advice prior to participating in it, during it and after it as well. So we need to make sure that operationally works. And our experience from what happened with the Time to Be Heard pilot and the evidence you've received was that what was achieved then appears to have been broadly effective, and it was viewed as working well, and it's our intention to make sure that that's achieved with the National Confidential Forum as well.
So the work that the government's done, you believe that based on other experiences in other countries, you've got the existing capacity that can deal with that at this point. There's no additional budget line here that's available to you to beef up those services?
Well, apart from the resource...
You don't feel that there's a need to beef them up? But
yeah, apart from the resource we're providing at the present moment, we believe there is capacity in the system to deal with that.
There's an under-capacity in the system now?
There is
not working to full capacity now, is that what we're saying?
It depends on different organisations on different places on that, in terms of the level of demand that they have on them. And it's also, it's worth keeping in mind the type of arrangement we put in place around Time to Be Heard demonstrated that there is capacity within some of the organisations to undertake some of that support work. Some of the additional work we're doing just now is to make sure that we have that geographically spread as much as possible, so that we can ensure that if there are organisations flagging up that we are just not in a position to be able to provide any further support, then of course we're going to have to address that, because we can't have individuals find themselves in going to the National Confidential Forum without the necessary type of support before, during and after it.
It's not an exact crossover, but we've done some work really. We had an evidence session recently with post-traumatic stress and some of those issues there, and they're all reporting that they're struggling to get access to a lot of services. So, you know, so I don't, not a direct crossover, but you know, there are certainly reported gaps on the evidence that we've had. We haven't tested that, but access to wider services in the community and in the health service.
Well, we've created some additional resources as well in some areas. So, for example, we've created the In-Care Survivors organisation, which again is an organisation that was set up specifically to work with those individuals who had been in an in-care, a care setting, and who had experienced some form of abuse in Scotland, which was established a couple of years ago, and it's a dedicated body to help to support and work with individuals who have experienced abuse in a care setting. We also, through our Survivors Scotland strategy, which was introduced in 2005, we invest annually nearly £1 million in helping to work with different organisations, and a lot of that resource goes to local organisations and supporting the work they do with survivors of abuse as well. But you know, what I want to give you a reassurance of, Convener, is that it's our intention to make sure there is sufficient capacity there, because the benefits of a National Confidential Forum would be undermined if that capacity wasn't there. And some of that work we're taking forward with the organisations just now is to make sure that we have sufficient capacity and services in place that can support people. And our experience from the Time to Be Heard pilot was that we got that right then, and our intention is to make sure we get that right with the National Confidential Forum as well.
The Minister has talked about the Development Fund, just to take the point that the convener makes about ensuring that we respond to need and develop capacity in each of the years of funding. We've changed our priorities to accommodate need. So the range we've covered is complex mental health, complex trauma, learning disability, minority ethnic services, physical health, remote and rural services, male survivors, survivors in prison, and some prevention work.
We heard from some of these organisations recently, and thanks for that. I suppose the other question that we found most difficult from witnesses is that why the committee were looking at this piece of the legislation. And the arguments were actually put that we should be, looking at some of the stuff that the Justice Committee was looking at in terms of, the access to justice and being denied justice in the wider sense was also affecting health and well-being of people as well. I give the Minister the opportunity to take the opportunity to explain to us their thinking about why this aspect of it should be dealt with health exclusively and not the others.
Well, this aspect of the National Confidential Forum is it stems back to some of the work that came from Tom Shaw's work in looking at issues around around abuse in care settings, and within that, highlighted that acknowledgement is a valuable therapeutic tool, and there has been a call for a number of years now for the establishment of some means by which acknowledgement could be recognised and provided, because there is a health and wellbeing benefit to that. And the response that we've taken forward in being responsible for the survivors' strategy from a health perspective is that the National Confidential Forum can assist in achieving that health benefit that can come from acknowledgement. So there's a significant level of history to this, in recognising the value of acknowledgement and dealing with some of the health issues that may arise and the therapeutic benefit that can be gained from that. I know my colleagues on the justice side have also been looking at some aspects around, for example, time bar, etc. The consultation that closed just last month, and I believe there's been around 40 to 50 submissions to that, and they're obviously going to consider that. Some of that will then, depending on what comes from that, will then give rise to some of the justice remedies. What I should say is that although this is a health response to the particular issues from the health side of things to do with abuse in a care setting, it doesn't mean that that's it. And clearly the work that's been taken forward by my colleagues on the justice side around the time bar issues are matters which relate to some aspects of this. It's worth also keeping in mind we have the interaction that's been taken forward by the Scottish Human Rights Commission. We originally commissioned the Scottish Human Rights Commission to bring forward the framework which has given rise to the interaction. I attended the first meeting of that interaction. I don't think there's been a further one since then. But the National Confidential Forum, I think, allows us to move on with the health aspect of that. I've got no doubt that some of the things that will come from the interaction will have a justice focus on them, and they can be addressed at that particular time. But that doesn't preclude us from being able to move on with the creation of an acknowledgement forum that, as I say, was highlighted many years ago, and also has been called upon by various organisations for a number of years now.
thank the Minister for his response. If there's no further question, can I thank you and your team for being with us this morning and providing valuable evidence for the process. Thank you very much. As previously agreed, the committee now goes into private session to discuss the work programme.